Hi, I'm Bill Beyers. I was president of AIChE in 2004 and was injured at the end of that year and have had an interest since then in the subject of professionals with disabilities. I'd like to introduce a panel of people here that will be talking together about professionals with disabilities and how AIChE can and should play a role in professionals in that ilk. So with that, I'd like to introduce my four co-panelists, Chris and John and Hobie and Ashley, who will introduce themselves and talk about how disabilities have been important to each of you in your careers today.
Hello, I'm Chris Pope. I am a 20-year member of AIChE and the chair of the Communities with Disabilities Task Force and a member of Societal Impact Operating Council. And how it affected my career up until 2001 is that I had other disabilities. It was a struggle to get through graduate school and then as a postdoc. But in '99, I caught 2 tick-borne diseases, and my career ended involuntarily in 2001. So I could say it destroyed my career, but since then, it's given me a chance to work more with AIChE because I want to be, well, back with my favorite molecules and equations, and I also know that I'm not the only one in this situation.
I'm John Johnston. I'm the current chair of the American Chemical Society's Committee on Chemists with Disabilities. I am employed as a scientific liaison with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Previous professional positions include chemical risk analyst and chemistry research leader.
I'm Hobie Wedler, member of the American Chemical Society's Committee on Chemists with Disabilities. I just very recently, in the past month, received my PhD in computational organic chemistry from the University of California, Davis. I'm totally blind, and a lot of people think of blindness as a hindrance in the disability field, in the chemistry field, and I actually think of it as a hindrance, as a benefit, not a hindrance, because when I think about chemical structures, I use the same spatial awareness skills that I've always used for my survival as a blind traveler. In other words, thinking about how to get from here back upstairs to the 12th floor is not that different in my mind than thinking about chemically how to add a chlorine to a benzene molecule.
Ashley?
Hi, my name is Ashley Nibert. I'm an associate member for the ACS Chemists with Disabilities Committee. How disability has kind of affected me is originally, I have multiple disabilities, and originally my family always knew I had Asperger's syndrome, but was afraid of the stigma of disability, and so kind of kept that hidden until I almost failed out of college because of it, at which point I was lucky to have a professor to help me. Mm-hmm. So then I started learning to deal with that, and then went blind halfway through my undergraduate career, but managed to get my BS in chemistry still, and now I'm working with a company called Independent Science, which sells laboratory access technology for blind and visually impaired. And I think something that's important for this is kind of a thing that I've heard once before, of to consider yourselves as temporarily abled instead of able-bodied people, because nobody ever knows when disability might strike. So it's something that everyone should care about.
Well said, Ashley. Thank you. Since my injury, I've relied on quite a network of friends and family, as well as professional acquaintances and coworkers, to help me sort of, I guess, regain some self-esteem and to move on into continuing my career. And I'm wondering what support has been important to you, Chris, in your managing your career and disabilities together.
Well, at first, since there was no long-term disability insurance at where I was for postdocs, the support was necessary for raw survival. And it'll make a great movie someday. Hopefully I'll have a better ending, but a lot of services, especially for me to actually get on Social Security, because they make it, you have to have quite a bit of ability to demonstrate that you're disabled.
Yeah, that's true.
That's unfortunate. One other thing is I've been a member of various support group 12-step programs since age 20, and they were also a great community for me. Professionally, one of the best things I ever did was starting to go to AIChE local chapter meetings about 3 months after my last postdoc position ended, and they've been very encouraging. However, it's been 15 years. Some have lost patience, but some have really encouraged me to keep going. So that's, and also I've been at the community college for the past 3 years, and their disabled student agency has helped with the accommodations I need, because this is what a disabled person looks like too. You know, could be anybody, could happen to anyone, anytime.
John?
So I have a speech impediment. When I graduated and gave my PhD dissertation, I stuttered on probably every third word. I went through a agency U.S. Department of Agriculture leadership development program, and could not speak in front of a crowd without stuttering, again, every sentence multiple times. And I realized that that was a significant hurdle to career advancement. And so I sought out help on my own. For me, Toastmasters International has made a big difference. And I've been doing that for 35 years. Just going once a week and getting comfortable speaking in front of an audience. And I would say that that has been the number one thing that has helped me move forward. In spite of that, I would say the hurdle has been that though I've excelled in my profession as a scientist, as a research leader, and I went back to night school and earned an MBA to go with my PhD, and I graduated first out of a class of more than 240 students. But yet, when I applied for the director of the research center, I met an obstacle because people felt that the director of a center shouldn't stutter, should be able to speak flawlessly, perfect. So, some good and some bad. So still frustrated somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah, thank you very much, Bill. I, as a blind guy, feel like one of the most important things is to have other people with similar disabilities out there to support you and to tell you what is possible and show you the road in a way. If we look at a non-disabled community, it's very common that everyone helps each other. People who are a few years ahead in school or a few years ahead in their career will help those that are coming up behind them, those that are sort of their mentees. And I think one of the most important aspects to remember when talking about disability is the idea of mentorship and having great mentors who either share or don't share the disability. But some of my best mentors have been other blind folks who aren't necessarily chemists but are scientists who can say, this is what you need, this piece of technology is really important, it will help you a lot, or this skill of working with readers, here's how you can do it, and really giving the guidance and the formality that needs to go along with that. That sort of guidance and focus from other people in my life has been tremendous for my career. And there have been other agencies, not professional societies, but agencies like the National Federation of the Blind, who put on a very large science academy for high school students. I was among the first group of 12 students to go to the National Federation of the Blind headquarters and work with blind scientists and engineers to build and launch a 12-foot rocket from Wallops Island, which is a NASA space flight facility. And the ability to do that and to just see blind people doing the work that they do and doing so well at it motivated me to go to undergraduate school in chemistry and eventually to get a PhD in chemistry and utilize it for a lifelong career.
Thanks, Obi. Ashley?
So for me, starting out, as I've said, starting out with the Asperger's, it was interesting because my family always approached it in the direction of that disability was something to be kind of scared or ashamed of. They looked at the statistics, they were like, if we admit that you have a disability, that you should try to hide it if you can, which kind of held me back a lot during the beginning parts of my life because they were more worried about, as long as you're doing fine academically, who cares if you don't have a social life or anything like that. And that was difficult. And then when I got to college, I got lucky with a professor that his specialty happened to be in studying chemistry education and specifically disability, how disability can affect that, and kind of saw me struggling because I was the student that would almost fail out of class but then go to office hours every day and try to be like, I felt like, what is wrong with me? Am I stupid? Or because I'd go to office hours and know the material, but then as soon as I was in the class and they announced 10-minute warning, I'm like, 10 minutes isn't a long time? Oh, I don't know anything. And so getting to a point that I could accept that and accept my disabilities was something that was a big step, as well as when I went blind, that was also a big step because it was, blindness is a bit of a continuum. It's not just light and dark like people think. And so it's something interesting to learn and grow on because I started out at what was considered like the top of legal blindness and continued losing my sight to where it was like as soon as I'd get used to ways to adapt and work with the sight that I currently had, I would lose more sight and had to learn new ways to adapt and develop with that. But I think overall that's made me a stronger person in trying to learn and discover all those new ways to do things.
Thank you. So I'd like to transition into talking about how professional societies can help professionals with disabilities. Chris and I met here in San Francisco 3 years ago. Chris had the idea that AIChE should be supportive, specifically and explicitly supportive of chemical engineers with disabilities. And I encouraged him. He's been very great over the last 3 years to move that forward, and along the way made contacts with our other three panelists who are members and leaders in the American Chemical Society's Committee on Chemists with Disabilities. And so maybe we could chat for just a few minutes about how can professional societies be more supportive. Many members probably wonder how they could be more supportive of their colleagues with disabilities, and we can maybe help inform them about what can a professional society membership do to help.
Well, first off, I was inspired by the existence of ACS's committee to start the initiative with AIChE. The first step is to recognize that people with disabilities exist in the field and that there is a need for a bit more support in some cases, but also part of the problem with employment in general is that institutions, especially those involving national security or private capital, have a tendency towards risk aversion anyway.
Yeah.
And that is especially true with people, and I've also noticed that since many of my limitations are psychological or cognitive, I've had anxiety and depression my whole life, and the Lyme disease since '99 has attacked my brain, that there's a particular concern about that. So first, I'd like to create an environment where employers look for reasons to include instead of reasons to automatically exclude, which is hard when they get 100 times many applicants than they can hire, and that number goes up from there. I like what the Institute has done by, well, indulging me in my stubbornness to keep this going.
Yeah.
Changing the direction of any large institution, it's like moving it in their carrier. It takes a while.
Yeah.
So what I would like to see would be more support for those, especially dealing with the financial aspect of it, because at best it's an involuntary retirement, or at least an involuntary break in one's career. And even if one has LTD insurance, that means your income's fixed at best, and there's probably a cut. For me, with my increase in 2017, I worked my way up to getting exactly $15,000 a year from Social Security. And when I read the income salaries, knowing that I can make $100 a year more than that, just recognize that having a disability and not being able to completely overcome it is not a character fault. It's not a matter of lack of will. It's a reality. And that's where I might never be able to guarantee full-time physical presence, but I like to think that I can make major contributions to the field.
So the ACS Chemists with Disabilities Committee really helps in several ways. I think one way is that we all know that in the STEM professions that people with disabilities are underrepresented. And there are probably a number of reasons for that. But one of those reasons is that many people with disabilities don't have the opportunity to pursue scientific careers. And a typical hurdle is that there's a perception that people with disabilities, perhaps someone who's blind or someone without arms, etc., cannot work safely in a lab. So the university excludes them from lab courses, and if they can't take the lab courses, then they can't have that a major. So the ACS Committee on Chemists with Disabilities brainstormed, and we have a publication on teaching chemistry to students with disabilities. So the first step is, yes, this can be done, and here's how you can do that.
When I think about disability, I think of 3 steps that need to be established before people really have full access in the workplace. The first of those steps is awareness. The second is making change, and the third is evolution. So if we talk about awareness, I'm referring to people simply being aware of individuals with disabilities in their field, or not in their field, just in society. And I think that professional societies like AIChE, like the American Chemical Society, and like the American Society of Enologists and Viticulturists, which I'm working with right now to develop a disability program, need to start by being aware, really understanding there are people in the field who are going to come to the table with disabilities, And that while we may have limitations in some places, our limitations are far outweighed by the ways that we think about the world differently, and that we can offer different ideas and thoughts to the world of whatever career we're focusing on. So I actually think people with disabilities approach the chemical community slightly differently than people who don't have disabilities, and can add things to that community that perhaps those without disabilities wouldn't think of or wouldn't have added. So there's a benefit there on the standpoint of awareness. And what has been so great about being involved with the American Chemical Society's Committee on Chemists with Disabilities is that we promote awareness. We show the society, the many thousand members, and it's up to about 100,000 members, isn't it, Jim?
That's right.
Yeah, so 100,000 members, that we are real, we are people with disabilities, and we can achieve our goals. The second is making change, and that really comes down to where can we slide into the community and fix things? What isn't accessible? Why isn't it accessible? And how can we change that? So by noticing that it's just a huge difference, and we've done a lot of that with the American Chemical Society. I have a nonprofit that uses chemistry, organic chemistry, and hands-on organic chemistry in particular as a lens to show blind and visually impaired high school and early college students that their disability should not hold them back from doing whatever they want to do. Do we expect them all to do chemistry? No, but we're changing their mindset of what they really can do. And finally, very briefly, the third point is evolution. Once we figure out where people need to be more aware and make them so, and once we implement changes, how can all this evolve? So we can do a lot of work initially, but we need to think about how can we continue that. And by having a professional society like the group that we're putting together with the AIChE this weekend, that will hopefully last a very long time, we're creating that evolution. By having a professional society that cares about disability and that has a committee based on it, reminds everyone to keep evolving.
Ashley?
From my perspective, I think, as Hobie had said earlier, it's very important to kind of surround yourself with professional societies and people who are like you. I got involved with ACS's Chemists with Disability Committee through the Women's Chemistry Committee at ACS, who then involved me to the which then pointed me to the National Federation of the Blind, which also led me to here. So getting involved in a professional society is something that can broaden your horizons of that. I think something else that's important to remember that many people forget is that disabled doesn't necessarily mean that there is something wrong with you. People think of it as disabled means something's wrong with you. If I turn off my router, my internet is disabled. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It just means that at this point in time, we need to figure out a different solution. And so that doesn't mean that disability is that anything is wrong with you, and that there is, if we just promote acceptance in that society, it's better. And you need to understand as well ways that because I have a disability, it might make me better somewhere else. Like on the point of laboratory work, a lot of students in chemistry labs, blind students especially, are often forced away from laboratory work because people think it would be dangerous. However, on the other side, once I was given the chance to do laboratory work and be a teaching assistant, my laboratories often were safer than everybody else's because I'm not the only one who could not notice somebody walking behind me. So I have someone announce when they're walking behind me, or walking behind you. Everyone just continue announcing, I have a beaker, it's containing sulfuric acid, I'm walking behind you. Because anyone could space out just as easily. And so that helps bring a safety awareness to that. And then with teaching, a lot of times students have a propensity to point at something and go, what did I do wrong? And most of the time, TAs, being annoyed with being asked that question, will just be like this and fix it. And what did that student learn? Nothing. And so with that, being blind has been an advantage in that I tell my students, well, I don't know what you're pointing at. You need to describe to me what it is that happened so I can figure out what needs to happen. And then oftentimes when they're describing what happened, they're like, and that's where I went wrong, oops. And then I'm like, okay, cool, I can go answer the next question. Because they learned and they figured out for themselves what it was that went wrong and what they need to fix. So in some instances, disability can be an advantage, and everyone has a place that they can belong in society with their skill sets no matter what. So figuring out where your spot is in your niche in society and giving a chance is probably the best, as well as that not everyone with a disability necessarily needs help. A lot of people are like, oh, let me try to help you, let me try to take you here, which isn't always wanted or necessary. And so the thing to remember as well is that the person who has a disability is the best expert on that. So make sure to ask that person, what do you prefer? Do you prefer if I lead you around the hotel? Do you prefer if you walk and I tell you directions? What people's preferences are can help with fostering inclusivity and just being able to ask, what can I do to help?
Could I add one?
Thanks, Ashley. Sure, John.
So, in this theme that you're hearing, that people with perceived disabilities can often have what we like to call unique abilities. And in the ACS, we have a poster series of famous scientists with disabilities. And for example, Albert Einstein had dyslexia. It doesn't take too much to hypothesize that perhaps his unique way of looking at the world aided him in his unique way of coming up with monumental discoveries in physics. Thomas Edison had said that being deaf was an asset because he could concentrate on his experiments without distractions. So we like to emphasize that people with disabilities are people with unique abilities oftentimes. And so the ACS has enabled me to put together a presentation with many examples of this, going out to professional groups and stating that if you, as an employer, can match that unique ability with the right job.
Exactly.
I mean, it's going to take some thinking, it's not going to fall in your lap, but you can end up with an employee who is better, a bigger asset, will give you a competitive advantage compared to a so-called normal employee.
If you don't mind if I add just one quick thing as well, right along the lines of what John was saying. It's important to recognize people with disabilities as having unique abilities, but there's also this understanding of an sort of two-way road here between ways we can treat disability in the workplace. We can either educate based on disability and teach people who might not know how we think and how we operate, or we can litigate and actually go, use legal power to go after employers and educators and things like this. And I just want to publicly say that by far the most important and best way to go about the problem is to educate. Teach people what you can do and teach them how maybe you need things adapted because of your limitations, but show people how you are unique and what you can do. That's exactly what Einstein did. He went and he showed people that he could really think about physics when he was a patent attorney, and that because he didn't do well in school was no reason to discount him. Other people go about the problem by litigating, by filing lawsuits and fighting with people, and no one benefits from that. That just leaves a sour taste in people's mouth about disability. Teach, educate, and learn.
Thanks, Obi. Well, I'd like to thank John, Hobie, and Ashley for coming here to be with us today from the American Chemical Society and your experience with the Chemists with Disabilities Committee. And I'd like to a special note of thanks to Chris. And if we can work together to bring both an awareness and a comfort and an understanding and appreciation among our colleagues within AIChE, as you've been able to do within ACS, I think we would have gone a long way toward making a contribution toward the overall benefit that AIChE provides to its members. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.